Welcome, little pigeons. Welcome, big pigeons. Welcome, old pigeons and young pigeons. Welcome to my home on this dark, cold night. You must have travelled far, through the bleak forest. You've made it now. Please, come in and make yourselves at home. Get yourselves warm and cosy and comfortable. The fire is lit, the candles are lit. The night ahead is long, but we will shorten it together with a story. There was once a man and a woman who lived in a small house at the edge of the deep, dark forest. And they were happy. They loved each other, but deep in their hearts there was a sadness because they had no children. And each month that the moon waxed and waned, their sadness grew a little deeper. Every day, the woman would walk deep into the forest until she came to a clearing. And here in this clearing there stood a magnificent oak tree, huge and broad and gnarled and beautiful. They said that this tree had been there for thousands of years. That this tree had seen the days when the wolves would sing and the bears would dance. They said there was something about this tree. And every day, the woman would bring an offering, maybe some breadcrumbs to feed the birds in the branches, or a few drops of wine to pour into the roots. But one day, she came to the clearing and she realized she'd brought nothing with her, nothing to offer the tree. But in her hair, a blue silk ribbon that her husband had given her some years ago. And so she tied the ribbon into the branches and watched as it fluttered in the breeze. Oak tree, bring my little babe to me. Oak tree, bring my little babe to me. She made her way back home, and by the time she got back, it wasn't only the ribbon fluttering, but something fluttering in her belly too. The months passed, and her belly swelled, and when winter came and her belly was as round as the full moon, she gave birth to a little baby girl. And they called her Marusha. And Marusha was happiest when she was outside, out in the cold, fresh air. Here she would sleep. And so her mother and father would wrap her in woolen blankets and place her in her basket and put her out in the cold. And there she would smile and sleep with pink, warm cheeks. And when they came to bring her in, she'd often be covered with a thin layer of frost that glittered like jewels. Marusha grew older. She learnt to crawl and to walk and to talk and to chatter and to sing and to dance. And the years passed and life was good. But then Marusha's mother got sick. Day by day she grew weaker and sicker and weaker until one day she did not wake from her sleep. And there was a great sadness in the house then. Just Marusha and her father, and no singing and no dancing. The years passed. Marusha cooked and cleaned and looked after her father and watched as her childhood slipped away. But one day everything was set to change, because Marusha's father returned from the market not only with the food shopping, but also, Marusha, I want you to meet your new family, your stepmother and your 2 stepsisters. We are a family again. And Marusha was delighted. 2 stepsisters and a stepmother, and suddenly there was life in the house, and suddenly there was singing and dancing, and Marusha and her stepsisters, they chased each other through the trees. They played hide and seek in the forest. They climbed up into the highest branches. They built dens. They played with dolls and toys. And at night they would curl up together in the same little bed, whispering and giggling and sharing stories. Life was good. Life was good. And the seasons passed. But as they did, things began to change. Marusha's stepsisters decided that the bed was too small for all of them to share. "You'll have to sleep on the floor, Marusha," they said. And so Marusha obligingly took a thin little blanket and slept on the floor, while her two stepsisters, under the covers, would whisper and giggle. They didn't want to play with Marusha anymore. And Marusha was sent off to fetch the water and to chop the firewood and to scrub the floors. And Marusha's stepmother, who had been such a good cook, who had baked the most delicious bread every day and buckwheat pancakes and stews and soups, grew tired of cooking and baking. "Marusha, can't you chop the vegetables today? Oh, can't you make the soup today? You can bake the bread. You get up early and bake the pancakes." And every day it was the same. And Marusha did more and more and more, until her stepsisters and her stepmother were doing nothing at all. "Marusha, work faster," they said. "Marusha, work harder." And when she couldn't work fast enough and she couldn't work hard enough, her stepmother would take her round to the back of the house, and with a broom she beat her. She beat her until she was black and blue. And Marusha saw as her stepsisters came and watched and laughed. And she saw then, as the masks of her stepfamily began to fade, she saw them for who they really were. She saw in their mouths venom. Venom that they hissed and spat. Venom that made their teeth itch and turn black. Marusha's father had eyes to see what was happening, had ears to hear what was happening, but he did not have the strength or the power or the courage to change what was happening. And so it continued, on and on and on. And yet, despite this, Marusha blossomed, she flourished, while her stepsisters did not. Young men began to turn up at the house. They would knock on the door. "Is Marusha at home?" they would say. Of course, Marusha's stepmother always made sure that Marusha was not at home. "But why don't you come in and have tea and cake with my two lovely daughters instead?" But the young men would always politely refuse. Once or twice, Marusha saw a young man, a musician, with kind eyes at the door. And she wanted to speak with him, but he was always sent away and she was always too busy. Marusha's stepmother realized that as long as Marusha was around, her daughters would be given no attention by these men. How were they to find husbands? Something had to change. Someone had to go. The next morning, when Marusha came down bright and early, as she always did, to light the fires, to bring in the water, to bake the breakfast, she was surprised to see her stepmother was already there, flipping buckwheat pancakes. "Marusha, today is a wonderful day. Please sit yourself down. I shall pour you some tea. I have good news. I have found you a husband." Hearing this, Marusha's stepsisters clattered down the stairs. "Oh, a husband! Is he rich? Is he rich?" "Oh, he's rich," said the stepmother. "He's so rich he owns the whole of the forest." "I don't mind about that," said Marusha, "as long as he's kind." "Don't worry about that. He's rich and that's all that matters. And you shall meet him tonight, under that ugly old oak tree in the forest. You must wait for him all night long and he will come for you." And so, that evening, Marusha got herself ready. She put on her thin little threadbare coat and her tattered woolen hat, and her father hoisted the cart to the horse, and Marusha climbed in next to him. And off they set, clattering through the forest, deeper and deeper until they came to that clearing, until they came to the oak tree. And there, Marusha kissed her father goodbye and jumped out of the cart. And her father watched her and said, "My darling daughter, should I not stay here with you? Make sure that all is well. Make sure that you're safe." "Father, I'm meeting my husband tonight. Come and fetch me in the morning. All will be well. I know it." And reluctantly he turned the horse and made his way back home. And Marusha stood beneath the oak tree and waited. As the shadows grew longer, as the sky grew blacker, and there was a chill in the air, but something caught her eye. A blue silk ribbon up there, fluttering in the breeze. Oak tree, bring my little babe to me. In the dark, feel a light, bring my little babe to me. In the cold, feel the warmth, bring my... She heard something. Through the darkness now, it was too dark to see anything, but she heard the sound of bells in the distance, and the snapping of twigs, and then a faraway voice that said, "Are you warm, little maid? Are you warm?" She knew then who this was. "I'm quite warm, Father Frost. I'm quite warm." She shivered with the cold. The sky was pitch black, and the cold was getting into her skin and into her bones, and the voice came again, closer this time, a voice that said, "Are you warm, little paws? Are you warm?" She had never felt so cold in her life, but she replied, "I'm quite warm, Father Frost. I'm quite warm." And then the voice came in her ear this time. "Are you warm, little pigeon? Are you warm?" She was so cold, her lips were so frozen, she could barely speak, but she managed to utter, "Quite warm, Father Frost, quite warm." And then the clouds parted. The full silver moon shone down, and Marusha saw standing before her was none other than Father Frost. And Father Frost smiled, and Marusha smiled, and he wrapped a thick fur coat around her shoulders, and then a beautiful necklace of jewels around her neck. He put out his hands. Marusha took his hands, and there, beneath the light of the silver moon, they danced. The next morning, Marusha's father came with the horse and cart through the forest as fast as he could. There was a thick frost on the ground. There were icicles in the trees. But there was his daughter, smiling, her cheeks pink and rosy with warmth, a beautiful fur coat and jewels. And she hopped into the cart beside him, and they made their way home. And I wish that you could have seen the faces of the stepmother and the stepsisters when Marusha stepped in through the door. Not only alive, but with a beautiful fur coat, with a lovely necklace. "Where did you get that? Where did you... You met your husband. He gave you these, didn't he?" And Marusha just smiled. "That's it. We are going to go and do the same thing tonight," said the stepsisters. "We are going to go meet our husbands, and we're going to get beautiful fur coats and lovely necklaces that are even more rich and lovely than yours." That night, they got themselves ready. Well, we don't need to bother with our coats, do we? They put on their boots. They didn't even bother with their hats or gloves. Into the cart, and off they went through the forest. And when they got to the old oak tree, Marusha's father didn't offer to wait with them. He just turned the horse around and went straight back home. And there they stood, the two sisters, beneath the tree. What if there's only one husband and there's two of us? Well, then obviously he'll marry me because I'm the oldest. No, he'll marry me because I am the most beautiful. He'll marry me because I have the daintiest ankles. He'll marry me because I've got the loveliest singing voice. And they began to fight. They began to push each other and shove each other and slap each other's faces and pull each other's hair. And they didn't hear the sound of the bells in the distance. They didn't hear the sound of the snapping of twigs. They barely noticed as the sky turned black above them. But they did feel the cold. But still, they kept on bickering and fighting and shoving and pushing. They didn't hear the voice that said, "Are you warm, little maids? Are you warm? You are as blue as a blueberry. Well, you are as purple as a turnip. You are a tooth chatterer. You are a bone clatterer. You are as numb as a stone. You are as dumb as a rock." And they fought, but as they did so, their fingers and toes were turning to ice. They could feel the cold getting under their skin and into their bones. And then they heard a voice that said, "Are you warm, little paws? Are you warm?" They stopped their fighting for a moment. "Well, of course we're not warm, whoever you are out there in the darkness. We're freezing. Anyway, leave us alone because we're waiting for our husbands to arrive." And they carried on fighting. By now they were rolling around on the ground, wrestling and shoving and pushing. And then came the voice again, in their ears this time. "Are you warm, little pigeons? Are you warm?" But they could not reply, because their lips were completely frozen and they could not move. And then the snow began to fall. Well, the next morning, bright and early, Marusha's stepmother rode the horse and cart deep into the forest through the thick snow, through the frost and the icicles on the trees, and she made her way to the clearing, to the oak tree. But she could not see her daughters until she climbed down and she saw a white heap on the ground, and she brushed the snow aside, and there she found them in a strange, snarling embrace. And she screamed. She screamed so loudly, a piercing scream, that even the wolves and the bears went running to their lairs. And then she picked up her daughters. She hoisted them one over each shoulder, and she stormed into the forest, trudging through the snow, shouting out, "Father Frost, I will have my revenge on you." Well, back at that little house, life was more peaceful now. Just Marusha and her father. And one day, that handsome young musician man, the one with the kind eyes, came knocking on the door. And Marusha was home and invited him in. Well, it wasn't long before there were wedding bells ringing. And it wasn't long after that before Marusha went into the forest, back to that oak tree. It was spring now, and the leaves were green, and she took the blue silk ribbon from her hair. Oak tree, bring my little babe to me. And then it wasn't long before that little house was filled with children. And there was singing, and there was dancing, and there was laughter, and there was love and joy. But if those children ever misbehaved, if they were ever naughty, if they wanted to stay out after dark or venture too deep into the forest, their grandfather, Marusha's father, would sit them down and would tell them the story of Father Frost. And after they'd heard it, well, they were always good little pigeons then. But what about Father Frost? Well, he's still out there, and he still roams. And it's not just the forest where he lives, but also the villages and the marketplaces and the towns and the cities too. And you never know when you might meet him. And if you do, remember this: always be kind, always be polite. And if you are, you might just get away lightly. Oak tree, bring my little babe to me. In the dark, feel a light, bring my little babe to me. In the cold, feel the warmth, bring